Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the ban on dreadlocks in the workplace. I was recently deeply disturbed when I learned that there was a woman of color that was denied or rescinded a job offer because she refused to cut or remove her dreadlocks. The EEOC took this case to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court did find that this policy was not considered racially discriminatory. However, they did find that precedents hold, a quote, that precedents holds that Title VII prohibits discrimination based on immutable traits, and the proposed amended complaint does not assert that dreadlocks, though culturally associated with race, are an immutable characteristic of Black persons, according to judicialwatch.org. After the anger subsided and fear crept in for me, my wife and I both have dreadlocks. We're both working professionals, and we both love the companies we work for in our jobs. But what if our employers suddenly required that we cut or remove our dreadlocks? What would we do? What if this request, since it's completely legal now, how many people of color would this disadvantage across the workplaces in America? Banning dreadlocks is definitely based on racial discrimination and specifically systematic racism. Just a little background on dreadlocks. According to Webster's dictionary, a dreadlock is considered a rope-like strand of hair that is braided or matted to form a lock. Dreadlocks have some spiritual connotations, cultural spiritual connotations, and religious connotations as well. And dreadlocks are also a form of Black hair care and hair maintenance for people of color. Um, People of color have different needs for their hair care. That's why you'll find that uh, we wear dreadlocks, braids, cornrows, and twists. It's a form of protection and hair care for our hair. And understanding the background of dreadlocks and other Black hairstyles and hair care is essential to understanding why and how hairstyles and hair maintenance are essential to identity and closely related to race and ethnicity in general. Policies such as the grooming policy implemented by CMS perpetuate and encourage systematic racism and systematic oppression. The actual grooming policy for CMS only really stated that extreme hairstyles were not permissible. It was this hiring manager's interpretation of that policy that was really the issue. Um, Dreadlocks are not an extreme hairstyle. There's nothing extreme about them or extraordinary. Just by definition, there's nothing unnatural about hairstyles. They are dreadlocks. They're literally just a natural hairstyle for Black hair in general. And there's been other cases where things of this nature have happened, but they've actually been overturned. The Army passed a regulation number 670-1, and in that regulation, many Black hairstyles were prohibited or restricted. They actually revised and acknowledged the disparities within that regulation, according to CNN.com. There was also a case of Griggs versus Duke Power Company. The Supreme Court decided that where an employer uses a neutral policy or rule or utilizes a neutral test, and this policy or test disproportionately affects minorities or women in an adverse manner, then the employer must justify the neutral rule or test by proving that it is justified by business necessity. This position was just a phone position. No customer or client would even see the applicant. It was literally a behind the scenes position. So even if she could prove that this hairstyle was extreme or unprofessional or anything of that nature, it wasn't a business necessity that she removed them. And furthermore, no person of color was included in this decision or in the policy, making that policy for that company. And excluding people of color when they're affected by rules of law, it is really doing it unjust to them, and it helps to encourage and perpetuate systematic racism. And systematic racism occurs when a group of people are disproportionately affected or discriminated against within institutions or organizations. And I think in this case, banning dreadlocks definitely disproportionately affects people of color because, according to the Supreme Court themselves, though culturally associated with race, they admitted that it's culturally associated with race. So to ban them in a workplace, it disproportionately affects people of that race. And systematic racism is just an issue overall in America, from the disproportionate rates that people of color are locked up, convicted, paid at a different scale for the same jobs. It's just something that's embedded in American culture, and it's one of those things that, uh, although there's nothing that states like you must discriminate against people of color, these things disproportionately affect people of color. So over the years, I really think that racism only has restructured itself in new and clever ways. Something becoming or being deemed legal doesn't make it right or fair. America should be moving in the direction of cultural inclusion instead of excluding people who are different or asking them to abandon their culture in so many ways. If you hear your friends making racially charged comments, correct them. If you notice disparities at work, speak out. If you're a hiring manager, encourage diversity. Teach your children to be accepting. Reject stereotypes in general. I'm extremely passionate about social justice and equality, obviously, particularly in the workplace. I've decided to specifically dedicate my career in human resources to undoing the harm that has been done to people of color in this country in many systematic forms. I know hundreds of people of color who have suffered from systematic racism in silence because they don't know how to speak out, who to go to, or they didn't have proof, and they couldn't identify or verbalize their experiences. I've personally suffered blatant racism, passive racism, systematic racism at every single job I've ever held in my 10 years of being in the workforce in the United States. And I just really encourage that people speak out, and regardless of if the injustice is done to you or to someone else. And I encourage everyone to do the same thing. And as Desmond Tutu said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Thank you.